I wanted to make a video today that's a love letter to the skills I developed playing ranked singles Pokemon back in my day with Pokemon X and Y. I consider these skills to be transferable to other aspects of life. I've worn many hats and took a hiatus from Pokemon from X and Y to Scarlet and Violet, but here I am 6 years later with 3 skills to help you improve at ranked Pokemon ladder that are transferable to other areas of your life. As with most skills, they can be learned in other ways too. I'm not saying they're exclusive to Pokemon, but I think it's always beneficial to take inventory of what skills can be further nurtured by doing recreational things like playing a game. These tips are to improve your chances of winning in ranked Pokemon. They aren't necessarily to improve your chances of having fun playing Pokemon. I too wish that Spidops was viable, but I don't make the rules. Lesson 1 is to know your enemy, or at least know enough to make an educated guess about them. Ranked Pokemon Singles is a best-of-1 format in which both players know the 6 Pokemon on each team and select 3 of theirs for battle. In order to succeed, players have to speculate on what their opponent will pick, and counter-pick accordingly. This is because Pokemon is boiled down to a game of rock, paper, scissors, except there's 18 different types, each with weaknesses and resistances, and every Pokemon can be up to 2 types. So as long as your Pokemon is an archetype that can exploit your opponent's weaknesses and minimize its own weaknesses, you have an increased chance of winning. So leveraging a team with a minimal chance of taking increased damage from the opponent's Pokemon and a maximum chance of doing extra damage against your opponent's Pokemon is paramount to succeeding. The best way to learn how to make educated guesses is to get educated. I recommend using Smogon, link in the description, to get an idea of what your builds are, and popular builds of other Pokemon. Then use Maryland's team building tool to learn the weaknesses and resistances of your team. Many Pokemon players will ask, "Hey, how do I train my team?" For that, I recommend Wolfie's video on it. Now that you've built your team and have a general idea of what's out there, all that's left is to build the muscle of doing the thing, picking your Pokemon. With a quick view of the opponent's team, I chose to get my Dark Terra-type Amoonguss, my Skeledirge, and my Kingambit. You may ask yourself, why did I choose this team? Well, there's a simple answer for that. After years of memorizing the weaknesses and resistances of Pokemon, I'm pretty good now at taking a look at a team and knowing what on my team will be good against what and what won't. At delivery. The first thing to notice about my opponent's team is that it has 3 Pokemon that are weak to Ghost type and 2 that are weak to Fire, which makes Skeledirge a great pick. Especially since the only Pokemon they have that we don't cover a weakness for is Dragonite, which is usually EV trained in physical attack, and my Skeledirge is EV trained in HP and physical defense. Another 2 of their Pokemon are weak to Dark type moves, leaving just Garganacl to deal with. Garganacl is weak to Steel and is weak to Grass, so my Amoonguss can cover Garganacl as well as my Kingambit, while the Dark type of Amoonguss and the Dark type of Kingambit can cover those 2 Pokemon. Could I have done something better? Probably, but Pokemon isn't a game with perfect information, and you only have 90 seconds to choose your team. While my decision increased the likelihood that my typing was leveraged against my opponent, there's no way for me to control which Pokemon my opponent ultimately picks. So let's see how it plays out. Fortunately, opening with Amoonguss with Dark Terra typing turned out to be a good decision. My opponent had a Psychic type Espathra, which is weak to Dark. I'm gonna surprise this player. If they're not switching out, I'm gonna Dark type on it. If you're familiar with Amoonguss, you may be curious as to why mine isn't a Fairy or Water type, like Smogon says. This brings us to lesson 2. Know what works thoroughly before subverting it. At the time of recording, there are over 1,000 Pokemon. Each Pokemon has a variety of builds that can be used. Nonetheless, there is a tier of Pokemon considered to be competitively viable over others by popular consensus. The highest is Ubers, but those aren't legal in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet ranked. So the highest to consider is OU, or overused Pokemon. They are tried and true because they put up results. For beginning players, I always recommend familiarizing yourself with them, because they're the meta. Amoonguss isn't a new Pokemon. It was originally released in Pokemon Black and White in 2010 and has had a grasp on the meta for a long time. I happen to have a lot of experience using it and facing it. Amoonguss is commonly a utility role Pokemon, often used to poison its opponents or put them to sleep. The advised Tera types are strictly to improve its defenses, so I figured if everyone expects Amoonguss to not be used offensively, what if I gave mine an offensive out? My Amoonguss knows Foul Play, a dark type move that does increased damage based on my opponent's attack stat. While it would do extra damage if Amoonguss was trained in attack, it does do a considerable amount of damage with a stab boost. That's when your Pokemon is the same type as its user, and when it's super effective. Consequently, using Amoonguss, I can predict that an opponent who's weak to dark will likely stay in against Amoonguss and take damage from Foul Play. After taking their safe turn against what they thought was a safe opponent, they'll have to swap out or lose their Pokemon. From opening with good damage on Espathra, I was able to set myself up for a Toxic. On their swap-in, I Toxic their Dragonite. Dragonite is typically trained in physical attack and bulky, so I stayed in with Amoonguss to try and punish them with Foul Play. Upon learning that this Dragonite would just use Recover, I decided to put Dragonite to sleep, falling back to Amoonguss's non-gimmick applications. Eventually, the pressure forced them to switch into Gholdengo. When they did, I knew their team was in a tough spot, so I swapped to Skeledirge. The most important part of this strategy is that I don't put myself at a disadvantage by having a Dark Tera type Amoonguss if the situation doesn't call for it. This is because Amoonguss is an OU tier Pokemon and can stand on its own. The difference between a gimmick and a strategy is that a strategy has a tried and true method to fall back on. Base Amoonguss can hold its own against many things. A gimmick, on the other hand, cannot withstand counterplay. If my Amoonguss had to go Tera to be effective, it'd be a bad inclusion. Lesson number 3. Advice is meaningless if you don't put in the reps. An opening in which I endangered 3 of my opponent's Pokemon without swapping means that I held the advantage, and it was time to swap to a sweeper. Enter Skeledirge. Skeledirge is super effective against Gholdengo and Espathra. Gets special attack boosts using Torch Song, which is super effective against Gholdengo, and it can take hits. So while we're ahead, we can set up Skeledirge to take down their team. This single battle stood as an example for some lessons, but it didn't guarantee me a win in other matches. Developing the familiarity and confidence necessary to respond to varying circumstances is a muscle. Learning about the game and watching your favorite creator helps, but you're never going to get better at something without practice. In Season 2 of online ranked play, I actually stagnated at the Great Ball League. You may be watching this and saying, okay, so how do I actually incorporate advice into my life? That's a great question. Step 1 is to evaluate the advice by considering the source, relevance, and alignment with your goals and values. 2, seek clarification if you're uncertain about any aspects of the advice. 3, take action to apply the advice, making changes to your behavior, mindset, or approach. 4, monitor your process to evaluate the effectiveness of the advice and make further adjustments if necessary. And 5, reflect on the results of applying the advice to identify what worked well and what could have been done better and how you might improve in the future. This video will help you get started, but if you don't apply the lessons and just continue about your day, then all this will amount to is time spent watching a video. I don't make these for metrics, so aspire to be more than one. I love you. Keep that head up. Yeah, that's a W. Hey, we got a W on stream. Can I get a W in the chat?